Snow whispered across the ridge like ghosts of old wars, brushing over the barrel of Staff Sergeant Elias Ward's rifle. Frost clung to his beard, turning each breath into a plume of steam that dissolved into the white wilderness. He lay prone beneath a pine, tree heavy with ice, his camouflage blending into the endless drifts. The cold gnawed through his gloves, but he barely felt it. He had been colder before, inside, when everything he believed about Earth's strength had frozen and cracked. Through the scope, the alien outpost shimmered faintly at the base of the valley. The Vrakul Dominion had built it from obsidian black alloy, a structure that looked more like a scar than a base. Around it, tall figures moved with mechanical grace, their armor glinting with energy fields that rippled like heat mirages. Elias adjusted the magnification, steadying the crosshairs on one of them. The creature's head was elongated, its movements precise, efficient, arrogant. He could almost hear their mocking voices from the intercepted transmissions that played on every remaining frequency. Your projectiles are toys. Your species, a brief inconvenience. He had seen those words made real 2 weeks ago outside Denver. Human artillery had pounded an advancing Vrakul line for 6 hours, and when the dust cleared, not a single alien had fallen. Their shields absorbed everything, kinetic, chemical, even directed plasma. The counterstrike had erased the city from the map. Elias had been one of 20 soldiers pulled from the wreckage. His captain hadn't been so lucky. Now he was alone in the northern mountains, his mission unacknowledged, his orders simple: observe, record, survive. Command had called it reconnaissance, but he understood the truth. He was expendable bait, a pair of eyes meant to die unseen. Yet, as he watched the alien technicians adjust a tall relay tower, he saw something that froze him more than the cold ever could, a brief shimmer, a pulse in their shields that flickered with each burst of transmission energy. For less than a heartbeat, the impossible became visible. Elias shifted, focusing on the tower's pattern. Every 78 seconds, the signal surged and the surrounding energy fields wavered. He timed it again and again. Predictable, repetitive, vulnerable. His pulse began to rise, but he steadied it with practiced control. He whispered to himself, "No such thing as invincible." The phrase had carried him through firefights and frostbite alike, and it anchored him now. He reached for his field recorder, muttering the timing intervals, the frequency signatures, the flicker duration. If he could send this data back to command, it could mean the first real countermeasure humanity had found. He keyed the transmitter. Static answered him. The storm rolling over the peaks had turned his comms into dead metal. A curse slipped between clenched teeth. He checked his position, recalculated the range. 2 miles, high crosswinds, sub-zero density. The shot was insane. Even with his modified rifle, even with the perfect bullet, it would be near impossible. But the alien's arrogance had created a momentary gap, and Elias Ward had built a career on impossible shots. He adjusted the bipod legs, dug his elbows deeper into the snow, and focused. Each exhale fogged the scope for an instant before clearing to reveal the alien relay again. He watched, memorizing every motion, every pulse of light, every gust that swept across the valley. The wind carried faint mechanical hums up the slope, a sound like machines laughing. He could end this outpost, or die trying. Either way, he would not let the Vrakul's taunts echo unchallenged through human skies. Snow continued to fall, slow and silent, as Elias whispered the countdown to the next shield flicker. His finger rested lightly on the trigger. 78 seconds, he murmured and smiled beneath the frost. The storm deepened, and the war for Earth waited on the mountain's edge. Elias steadied his breathing, letting the cold sharpen his senses rather than numb them. The mountain air sliced at his lungs each time he inhaled, but he welcomed the sting. It kept him alert, present, anchored in the moment rather than drifting back into memories he could ill afford to relive. But the past came anyway, creeping in through cracks he couldn't seal. He saw Captain Rourke standing beside the smoldering ruins outside Denver, shouting orders no one lived long enough to follow. He smelled burning asphalt, heard the crack of alien energy bolts carving through armored vehicles as though they were paper. The memory tried to swallow him whole, but he shoved it down, forcing his focus back to the present. Dwelling wasn't survival. Calculation was. Through the scope, the relay tower pulsed again. He tracked the rhythm as naturally as he tracked a heartbeat. 78 seconds between each destabilization. Less than a tenth of a second when the shield flickered. A sliver of opportunity, but it was enough to change the course of a war if someone could exploit it. He whispered the timing aloud, not because he needed to hear it, but because the act grounded him against the churning uncertainty beneath his disciplined exterior. Elias shifted slightly to relieve a pressure point in his shoulder. Even the smallest discomfort could throw off a shot of this magnitude. He scanned the terrain surrounding the alien outpost, noting the angled ridgelines, the wind channels, the drifting snow patterns that might distort visibility. Nothing in his environment was stable. Gusts swept across the valley, carrying flecks of ice that winked like sparks in the pale light. Yet amid this chaos, he found a strange sense of clarity. The cold simplified the world, stripping away everything but essentials: target, timing, trajectory. He inspected his rifle with practiced reverence. Every component had been modified, adjusted, or outright replaced during years of fieldwork. He had never given the weapon a name, but it was the closest thing he had to a partner. The experimental rounds he carried were prototypes, dense, overpowered slugs designed to push Earth's limits of ballistics. They were meant for armored vehicles, not shielded alien sentinels, yet they were all he had. If they failed, he would simply freeze or be hunted. If they worked, humanity would learn something the Vrokol insisted was impossible, that their shields could be breached. As he calibrated his scope, Elias allowed himself a brief reflection, a dangerous indulgence. He remembered the moment he realized he was the only one still alive in the rubble of Denver. The weight of survivors' guilt settled onto him then, solid and cold, a thing he wore like armor. He wasn't fighting for medals or orders anymore. He fought because he was still breathing while others weren't, and that truth demanded action. The Vrokol had laughed at Earth's resistance, mocking its weapons and spirit. Elias intended to carve that laughter from their throats. A burst of motion drew his attention. One of the alien engineers opened a panel on the relay tower, exposing a pulsating core of blue-white energy. Elias zoomed in, his heart ticking faster. The shield shimmered again, longer this time, unstable, almost fragile. Perhaps the storm interfered with the tower's output, or perhaps the tower's function required periodic vulnerability. It didn't matter. It was a weakness, and weaknesses existed to be exploited. He began plotting the firing solution in his mind. Wind drift, temperature density, bullet drop, pulse timing, and a micro delay between trigger squeeze and muzzle exit. There was no room for error. A perfect shot or a dead man. Those were his only outcomes. The relay pulsed once more, and the valley reverberated faintly with alien energy. Elias exhaled slowly, a misty plume swirling from his lips. The next surge approached. Decision time narrowed to a razor's edge. He settled his finger against the trigger, feeling its familiar resistance. 78 seconds. He murmured again, but this time the words carried purpose. The shot was no longer just possible. It was necessary, and he would take it. Elias counted down the final seconds in silence, the numbers marching through his mind with the precision of a metronome. The wind eased for a heartbeat, as though the mountain itself held its breath with him. Snowflakes drifted lazily across his field of view, each one catching the faint glimmer of the alien relay tower's pulsing core. The flicker approached, predictable but unforgiving, and Elias allowed the world to narrow until only the crosshairs and the shimmering weakness remained. When the pulse struck, the shield faltered, and Elias squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder with a force that traveled through bone and muscle, a living reminder that physics still belonged to humanity, even if the war seemed not to. The shot sliced through the distance with impossible grace, a dark comet against the pale sky. A half-second stretched into an eternity in which Elias questioned everything. His calculations, his instincts, his worthiness to survive when so many better men had fallen. Then the round struck. The tower's exposed core ruptured in a burst of searing blue light, expanding outward in a shockwave that washed across the outpost like a silent scream. Alien shields collapsed in cascading ripples. Energy fields sputtered, crackled, and dissolved like mist. Elias watched in awe as a vulnerability turned into a fracture, and that fracture widened into an opening no one had believed existed. The Vrokol soldiers reacted instantly, their fluid movements betraying a rare hint of panic. For the first time, their confidence fractured. Their armor, so often untouchable, glowed erratically as the protective fields failed. Elias didn't hesitate. He chambered another round, adjusted for the shifting wind, and fired again. The bullet tore into one alien's exposed torso, sending it collapsing into the snow in a tangle of limbs and sparking armor. Another shot followed, and another. Elias did not celebrate. Each trigger pull was deliberate, controlled, almost reverent. He wasn't eliminating enemies. He was preserving a chance for humanity. But the valley was vast, and he was only one man. As he worked, he saw the outpost reorganizing. A squad of aliens took shelter behind the fractured tower, while others sprinted toward a fortified bunker now partially unshielded. Their movements regained structure, discipline returning with terrifying speed. Elias recognized the shift. These were no longer confused sentries. They were soldiers preparing to adapt. He had seconds before they located his firing position. He relocated down the slope, crawling through snow that clung to his gear and stiffened his joints. Every inch mattered. Every breath threatened to give him away. When he settled behind a fallen tree trunk, he swung his rifle back into position. The aliens had not yet pinpointed him. They scanned the ridgelines wildly, searching for the phantom who had shattered their illusion of invulnerability. Elias watched them regroup around a new command figure, a towering Vrokol with armor that pulsed with deeper energy, its height dwarfing those around it. Even without seeing its face, Elias sensed authority radiating from its stance. The creature gestured sharply, and the soldiers dispersed in a coordinated pattern. A cold realization settled over Elias. The aliens were no longer merely reacting. They were hunting, and they had chosen him as prey. He considered retreating deeper into the mountains, escaping into the storm's cover. But his recorder was still active, capturing every second of the shield collapse, every flicker, every resulting failure. The data alone could shift the entire war. If he fled now, there was no guarantee the information would reach anyone. The storm still devoured transmissions. The only workable broadcast point lay farther up the ridge, where the wind carved away the interference at unpredictable intervals. He checked his ammunition. Enough for careful work, not enough for a firefight. He wiped frost from his eyebrows and steadied his breath. The aliens grew closer, their movements slicing through the snow with predatory precision. The advantage he'd created would not last, but it was enough to justify the risk that now towered over him like a shadow. Elias rose into a crouch, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and advanced upslope. The storm thickened, swallowing him in white, and for the first time since Denver, he felt something like resolve warming the cold within him. The aliens would come, but he would be ready. Elias pushed through the deepening storm, each step a negotiation with the mountain's shifting temperament. Snow hammered his back in relentless waves, masking his trail but draining his strength with every stride. He climbed toward the narrow ridge where the wind occasionally carved open pockets of clear transmission, the only hope he had of broadcasting the data that could change humanity's fate. Behind him, faint rhythmic thuds announced the aliens' pursuit. Their gait was steady, confident, predatory. They believed the terrain belonged to them now. Elias intended to prove otherwise. He reached a small shelf of rock jutting from the slope and pressed his back against it, breathing in sharp, painful gulps. His fingers trembled, whether from the cold or exhaustion he couldn't tell. The storm rattled the ridge like a living thing, its shrill song woven with a low hum of alien machinery approaching through the white haze. Elias steadied himself, forcing focus back into his limbs. Survival demanded clarity, and clarity required control. He let the wind carry away his doubts as he unshouldered his rifle and scanned the shifting blur below. A dark silhouette materialized first, the towering Vrockhull commander he'd glimpsed earlier. Its armor pulsed with deep, angry light, the resonance of a creature denied absolute dominance for the first time. Elias lowered himself behind the ridge's lip and studied the alien's approach. It moved with deliberate restraint now, aware it hunted a foe capable of piercing its defenses. Behind the commander, smaller soldiers fanned out, their weapons carving thin lines of energy through the drifting snow. Elias gauged their formation and knew he couldn't simply outrun them. He needed leverage, something the mountain itself could provide. Above him, a massive overhang of snow clung precariously to the cliffside. The storm had fattened it with layers of unstable powder. Elias shifted quietly, bracing the rifle against his shoulder and aiming at a narrow crevice where the overhang met rock. He inhaled, ignoring the tremor in his arms, and fired. The crack echoed through the valley like a thunderclap. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mountain groaned, deep and resonant, as the snowpack sheared free. An avalanche roared downward in a churning wave of white fury. The aliens reacted instantly, their disciplined formation collapsing into frantic evasive maneuvers. Elias didn't wait to watch the outcome. He turned and scrambled higher, using the chaos to buy precious seconds. His legs burned, his lungs screamed, but he climbed with the desperation of someone carrying more than his own life. When he reached the crest, the storm thinned just enough to reveal a swirling gap in the clouds. He dropped to his knees, pulled out the recorder, and began patching it through his rifle's long-range transceiver. Wires clicked, the interface flickered, and static filled his ears. He adjusted the gain, fighting the interference. Below, the commander emerged from the avalanche's wake, battered but alive, its armor cracked and sparking. It raised its weapon, aiming directly at the ridge. Elias whispered a brief apology to the mountain for what he was about to do, then slammed the rifle into the snow, using the slope as a natural shield while he completed the transmission. A new tone pierced through the static, the signal climbing, stabilizing, reaching. His data streamed out like a lifeline cast into the void. The alien fired. The blast tore through the rock, showering Elias with shards of ice and earth. He shielded the recorder with his body, refusing to let it fall. Another shot followed, closer this time. He braced himself, prepared for the final impact, when a ping sounded in his earpiece. Confirmation of full upload. Relief washed through him, fierce and overwhelming. Humanity now held the key to breaking the Vrockhull's supremacy. Elias rose just enough to see the commander charging, its weapon glowing with lethal intent. Yet he felt no fear. He had already won the moment that mattered. As the storm swallowed the ridge once more, he gripped his rifle, ready to meet his pursuer with the last strength he possessed, knowing Earth no longer faced the dark alone.